CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: modest advances with a much-anticipated counter-offensive in its early stages. Ukraine claims to have recaptured a fourth village. A Chechen military unit signs a deal with Russia in Moscow's latest attempt to take control of mercenary armies. A show of unity across Europe's skies as NATO begins its biggest ever air exercise led by Germany. And Italy's Silvio Berlusconi, one of the most colourful and controversial figures in European politics, has died at the age of 86. Ukraine is reporting heavy fighting along parts of the front line hours after it said it had recaptured a fourth village in the southeast of the country. Kyiv is pushing ahead with its long-awaited counter-offensive, but the territory it claims to have retaken is relatively small. Both Kyiv and Moscow are said to have suffered losses. Our correspondent Yolo Abdavid has the story.
Each battlefield gain is lauded, however small, a reason to show Ukraine's colours. A soldier confirms his unit from the Marines' 35th Brigade has control of Storozhev village. In all, Ukraine's army chiefs claim several villages in southeast of the country have been retaken. Blahodatne and Neskushne are in the Donetsk region and nearby Makarivka.
I'm authorised to declare the liberation of Blahodatne village near Velika Novosilka. It was done by fighters from the 68th Jaeger Infantry and the Alexei Dovbush Brigade. The operation was successful, and they were supported by units from our frontline defence forces between Avdiivka and Kherson.
The ugly remnants of war are left behind. Villagers who stayed carry on with their daily lives, while the Marines move on to the next battle to the south and east of Ukraine. A lot rides on this counter-offensive for Ukraine. Some Western equipment is being used, but the lack of air cover will worry military leaders. Fighter and helicopter pilots have to be resourceful when they engage their enemy.
We wait for weapons to be delivered. We'll receive them, but we'll have to check, to train with them, and to use these rockets during training. Then we'll be able to use them in combat, I hope.
Meanwhile, divisions remain on the Russian side of the conflict. While the country's official soldiers are awarded medals and applauded for their action in Ukraine, there have been months of public bickering between the leader of Wagner's mercenary group and Russia's Ministry of Defense. To control all its professional soldiers, conscripts and volunteer militias, Russia is introducing central contracts and Kremlin authority over all their fighters in Ukraine.
A military order confirms that by July the 1st, contracts must be signed that determine all our activities. The order grants the right to all defenders to fulfill their military duty. All social protections and family rights for military personnel apply to members of volunteer detachments.
South of the current fighting, the extent of the flooding caused by the breach in the Kakhovka Dam is widespread. Farmland that won't be growing food this year, and roads that are turned into rivers. Yolo Abdavid, CGTN.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, Wagner's boss Yevgeny Prigozhin has refused to sign a contract with the Chechen Special Forces group, we understand. What should we read into this?
Well, indeed, after the announcement by Russia's Ministry of Defense that anyone involved into the fighting in the so-called special military operation in Ukraine should be signing the contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense, the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has once again criticized the ministry itself and the orders that have been issued. He said his fighters would not sign anything with Russia's Ministry of Defense. He said they were obeying the commander-in-chief, that is the Russian president, and the interests of the Russian Federation. So he said his his group was fully integrated into the entire system, but wouldn't be receiving the orders from the Russian Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu. At the same time, the timing is, of course, of essence, because this is exactly happening as both sides have admitted that the Ukrainian offensive is underway. And we've also heard that the Chechen fighters from the Ahmad battalion have been signing those contracts with Russia's Ministry of Defense. And the head of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, said that that would indeed have a positive effect. He said there would be no need to find the legal loopholes to find the way to make the payments possible to any one of those Ahmad fighters who get wounded or killed in the ongoing military effort in Ukraine. So Russia's Ministry of Defense says that this move is indeed to raise the effectiveness of the ongoing fighting, but Wagner mercenary group head has once again taken this as an opportunity to criticize the Russian Ministry of Defense.
And we've heard from President Putin as the country marks Russia Day. What did he have to say, if anything, about the latest developments in Ukraine?
Well, indeed, Russia marks Russia Day today, and the Russian president has been thanking the Russian people for their devotion to the country. He said it is the sense of patriotism and this devotion to the country that is uniting the society and makes it stronger, serving as the very important foundation for the support for the Russian fighters in the military effort in Ukraine, the so-called special military operation. He also has raised an issue of the Ukrainian armed forces using the armed forces to hit the civilian targets in Ukraine. He said there was no military sense at all. He said that was taking place, and he criticized Kyiv for that. But Russia's Ministry of Defense has been speaking about the repelling of the Ukrainian offensive activities on the Zaporizhia and Donetsk direction, saying that all the attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces have been repelled, and also insisted that the Russian armed forces have used a high-precision strike to hit the Ukrainian reserves in Ukraine, though. So Russia insists the operation is ongoing and didn't comment on any of the territorial gains by the Ukrainian side.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chonashova in Moscow. Well, NATO has begun an unprecedented show of strength with its largest ever military air exercises in Europe. The German-led Air Defender 2023 is a display of unity against potential threats to the security alliance. Let's talk to our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin. Trent, just talk us through these drills and what they consist of.
Well, Jamie, I mean, this is very much an unprecedented military exercise. I don't use that word lightly. It is the largest air drill that NATO has ever carried out. In its history. We know that 250 aircraft are involved from 25 different countries, 10,000 military personnel. It is a very, very strong show of force in the sky from NATO, as you said, very much centred around this notion of deterrence and trying to send a strong message that an attack on one is an attack on all. We know the principle behind all of this is rehearsing what NATO would do in the event of Article 5, which is considered an attack on one country, how the entire alliance would respond as a whole. Some of the specific things that NATO will be doing will be running through drills on how to defend troops from the air, airborne battles against enemy jets, the interception of medium and long-range missiles by NATO bombers, anti-submarine warfare, and interestingly, Jamie, one tactic which was added quite late at the planning stage, we understand, which is how to evacuate an airfield. We're told that was because of those scenes that we saw in the fall of Kabul. Clearly something didn't go right there, or something went very wrong based on how that evacuation went in quite poor fashion. So NATO trying to work on its skills there. But look, a huge day really for the military in Europe. We are expecting some flight disruptions across Germany because all of this. The military is telling passengers that if they're concerned about that, to contact their airline, but they're doing their best to minimise any air traffic disruption.
How much has the war in Ukraine played a role in the planning of these military drills?
Well, look, on paper, they're not linked. This is an exercise which is 5 years in the making. It was first conceived back in 2018. But of course, Europe was a very different place in 2018 before we saw that conflict in Ukraine. So there is a very real understanding, certainly amongst leaders in the military and also politicians, which have been commenting that they know that military planners, not just within NATO, are watching all of this very closely, but also further to the east in Moscow. We know as well that there's been some pretty strong words said by several Western officials, including the US ambassador to Germany, Amy Goodman, who said that these exercises send a very strong message that without a shadow of a doubt, NATO will defend every inch of its territory, and it will dispel any myths or concerns that there might have been about the agility and swiftness of the alliance, saying that NATO is ready to respond very, very quickly should it ever come under attack.
OK, Trent, thank you for that. Our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin. The former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has died at the age of 86. Berlusconi was the country's longest-serving premier and continued to be an influential figure in Italian politics even after his term ended. Aside from his political career, the colourful self-made billionaire built a media empire, was never far from corruption allegations, and sometimes in the middle of some rather lurid sex scandals. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Giles Gibson in Rome. Giles, he was a divisive, some would say controversial figure. Statesman or sex scandals, how will he be remembered?
Well, I think another Italian Prime Minister, or ex-Italian Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi, really summed it up, Jamie. He put in a tweet just after the news broke saying, many loved him, many hated him. And that's just because of the extraordinary sweep of Silvio Berlusconi's life when you look back at it. You know, starting out as a singer on cruise ships as a young man, then building his business empire, becoming a billionaire tycoon, owning AC Milan Football Club for around 3 decades, and then becoming the Prime Minister of Italy on 3 separate occasions between the early mid-90s and 2011. And of course, as part of that, growing very close to some other very controversial figures, such as the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the former leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. But also, I think the thing that is just going to hang over Silvio Berlusconi's name and his legacy is going to be those so-called bunga bunga parties that he had over the years at his villa just outside Milan. As a result of one of those parties, he was convicted of paying a woman who was under 18 at the time for sex, although that conviction was overturned on appeal. But that sort of closeness to scandal that really was around Silvio Berlusconi for so much of his political career, I think that is perhaps what's going to define him.
Berlusconi's style of politics, some might say, paved the way for later politicians like Donald Trump and perhaps even Boris Johnson. Berlusconi changed the political landscape in Italy, didn't he? I mean, what does his passing now mean for the way politics is done in Italy?
Well, there was a very heartfelt tribute from the current Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, once the news of Berlusconi's death broke. She said that he taught Italy not to accept limits imposed by others. She, of course, will also be concerned about the fact that Silvio Berlusconi was leader of the Forza Italia party, which is part of her current governing coalition, and there is now speculation about who is going to step into that void and take on the leadership of this party that was founded and just dominated completely by Silvio Berlusconi over around 3 decades or so. There is talk of Antonio Tajani, who is the current foreign minister, a very senior name within Forza Italia, of him taking on the leadership. And there is also now talk here in Italy of Berlusconi's daughter, Marina Berlusconi, taking on the leadership of the party that her father founded. But look, I think those are questions probably for later in the week, for another day. At this point, over the next few days, Berlusconi's friends, his family, his allies are getting ready to mourn him. There's going to be a state funeral taking place in Milan in the famous Duomo Cathedral on Wednesday.
Giles, thank you for that. Our correspondent Giles Gibson in Rome. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, over $1 billion of EU aid for Tunisia to bail out the country and cooperate on people smuggling. But there are strings attached.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Modest advances with the much-anticipated counter-offensive in its early stages. Ukraine claims to have recaptured a fourth village. A Chechen military unit signs a deal with Russia in Moscow's latest attempt to take control of mercenary armies. And a show of unity across Europe's skies as NATO begins its biggest ever air exercise led by Germany. The European Union is considering offering Tunisia nearly $1 billion in aid to shore up its struggling economy. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Tunis could receive the payout once necessary agreement is found. The potential aid offer comes amid concerns that economic instability in Tunisia could make a growing migrant and refugee crisis even worse. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Mark Webster in Brussels. Mark, give us more detail on this EU aid offer.
Well, the loan facility breaks into three parts, essentially. The first and biggest is 900 million euros in what it says is macroeconomic support. Now that, as you alluded to in the introduction, is to prevent the Tunisian economy, which is already in a dire state, from going into meltdown, because that would undoubtedly hasten migrants leaving Tunisia as well. The second part is 100 million euros, which would be for emergency budgetary support. Now, that's short-term money, which would simply fill the black hole in the Tunisian budget, because, again, if projects were being cancelled, then that's going to lead to greater unhappiness and social unrest in Tunisia. The third one, and this is the part that's probably of most interest to the European Union itself, is 100 million euros plus in order to directly to try and stem the tide of migrants who will be heading again towards countries like Italy and Greece. Now, that money will go to increase border security and it will help to combat people smugglers. And it was on that subject that the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, had this to say.
So we will work together on an anti-smuggling operational partnership, and we will support Tunisia with border management. This year, the European Union will provide 100 million euros to Tunisia for border management, but also for search and rescue and anti-smuggling and return. The objective is to have a holistic approach to migration policy rooted in the respect for human rights.
Mark, what's been the response from Tunisia's president?
well, not wholehearted support, we'll put it like that. What they're looking at is saying, look, obviously we recognise we need help. Tunisia is in a dire state right now, and we need outside support, and it has to be financial. But the reason, for instance, that a separate deal, which was going through with the International Monetary Fund, is still on hold, is that the IMF was asking for very stringent conditions in order to get the money. And the president argued, look, if you start insisting that we privatise public companies, that could lead to higher unemployment, that will inevitably fuel unhappiness in the Tunisian people. So, let me put it bluntly to you, I'm sure he said, if you put too stringent conditions on this money, on these loans, which we know we need, then you will simply fuel the problem which you said you wanted to combat. And you will see an even larger number of migrants heading towards Europe. And for the prime ministers of countries, say, like Italy, like Greece, that is an absolute red signal. They don't want to see more numbers coming. So he will be saying, don't push us too hard. We need the money, but don't put too many conditions on it, or you will make the problem with migrants even worse.
Mark, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Mark Webster, in Brussels. The governor of Texas has announced the state will put floating barriers in the Rio Grande River to deter migrants crossing from Mexico. The river has long been considered one of the deadliest routes for migrants, but the Republican governor's idea has provoked controversy. Our correspondent, Tony Waterman, reports.
Deploying a border wall in the water is certainly a much cheaper and easier thing to do than building barriers on land. And these buoys are massive round red balls measuring 4 feet or about 1.2 meters in diameter. So they will be very difficult for a swimmer to scale. And officials say they will be anchored to the riverbed with netting to prevent anyone from trying to swim underneath them. The first buoy string will stretch about 300 meters, and it's going to be deployed almost immediately in Eagle Pass, where there has been this uptick in crossings. But Governor Greg Abbott says the ultimate goal is to install these buoys across vast stretches of the Rio Grande to act as a deterrent. The river is a main crossing point. It stretches more than 2,000 kilometers along the U.S.-Mexico border, making it impossible for border agents to patrol every inch. So officials say these inflatable buoys will stop migrants from even trying to cross. But critics argue that won't be the case. They say migrants will continue to come and that the Rio Grande is already dangerous enough. There are plants and debris in the river. There are swift, often unpredictable currents. And in fact, a National Guardsman died last year trying to save migrants caught in the current. So advocacy groups fear these buoys will just lead to more tragic outcomes. Officials, though, say these buoys are part of a multi-pronged approach to border security, which also includes razor wire and the deployment of more troops. This is just Texas's latest salvo against the Biden administration, which state officials accuse of not doing enough to prevent illegal crossings. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Austin, Texas.
The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has accused his predecessor of asking him to do something he wasn't prepared to do in his first remarks since Boris Johnson's surprise resignation as an MP on Friday. Johnson's supporters claimed Downing Street blocked some of his candidates to join the House of Lords, the UK's upper house, a traditional right of prime ministers when leaving office. 8 of Boris Johnson's nominees were rejected by the commission, which vets nominations.
And look, when it comes to honours and Boris Johnson, look, Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises to people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
The driver of a bus that crashed in Australia, killing 10 wedding guests, has been charged with dangerous driving. The 58-year-old man was refused bail and will appear in court on Tuesday. It's Australia's worst bus accident in almost 30 years. Another 25 people were injured in Sunday's crash near the town of Greta, 100 miles from Sydney. Thousands of homes have been evacuated around one of the Philippines' most active volcanoes amid fears of a large eruption. Mount Mayon in Albay province started spewing lava on Sunday and has already caused earthquakes and rockfalls. Anyone within 6 kilometers of the volcano has been advised to leave, while airline pilots have been told to reroute. Preparations are being made across Pakistan and India's state of Gujarat for a cyclone. The storm, named Biparjoy, could make landfall on Thursday with wind speeds of up to 135 kilometres an hour. Gujarat fishermen have been warned to stay at home, and offshore oil installations told to move all workers to safety. While many of the world's movie industry's big names are flying to Shanghai for the city's film festival, one famous Chinese film director is travelling to Europe to promote his work. After events in Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria, Xi Fei has been welcomed in Greece. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas had a front row seat.
The Girl from Hunan, a film by award winner Xi Fei about a young girl who was forced into an arranged marriage. Although filmed in the 80s, it was showcased last week here in the seaside city of Volos in central Greece. The Cinematic Arts and Diversity event was organized by the Confucius Institute and the Chinese Cultural Center of Athens, and it was the first of its kind since the pandemic. Its aim was to promote people-to-people and cultural exchanges through art.
Now we enjoy the movies more today than we did in the past. Nowadays, there are translations of the movies I have directed, so it's easier for the audience to understand and connect to them. And through the translations, there is an exchange of cultures with people, now being able to understand a bit more of Chinese culture.
The aim of the event was to promote Sino-Greek ties, as well as highlight some of the similarities between the two countries.
The showcase of the film is presented here so Greeks can understand a bit more about Chinese culture, but mostly to realize how similar we both are and how we can have stronger mutual interaction.
And the two countries have been influencing each other's cinematic development for over half a century.
Ever since modern Greek cinematography was established around the early 70s, with its most known director, Theodoro Agolopoulos, it always had close ties with Asian culture and specifically China. Especially that director has influenced the Chinese cinema culture.
The economic ties between China and Greece are well known, thanks to the high-profile Belt and Road flagship projects like the Port of Piraeus. But cinema offers a different way of bringing the two countries closer together through creative cooperation and understanding. One of the attractions of events like this for directors like Xi Fei is the opportunity to highlight challenging subjects, such as an arranged marriage, in a way that the audiences can relate to. With events like this becoming increasingly popular in Greece, Xi is planning to showcase more of his films across the country. Evangelo Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
The headlines again. Modest advances with the much-anticipated counter-offensive in its early stages. Ukraine claims to have recaptured a fourth village. A Chechen military unit signs a deal with Russia in Moscow's latest attempt to take control of mercenary armies. And a show of unity across Europe's skies as NATO begins its biggest ever military air exercise led by Germany. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.